How's it going, Star Seekers? Welcome back to the channel, where today I'm going to be taking a look at Foregone, an action platformer which for a change is not a roguelike, nor is it a Metroidvania style game. It's a straight up linear campaign which sees you following the journey of a super soldier known as an Arbiter. Your mission is to save the city of Calagan from the Harrow, a corruptive force which has been reviving the dead, including a bunch of incredibly powerful creatures. But does this pixel beauty have what it takes to stand out amongst several other fantastic platformers available for a similar price? Hopefully this review will help you decide. My name's Gotcake and welcome to Star or Shovelware. So the game opens with an introductory level which teaches you the basics. Here you learn about the standard platforming and combat mechanics. You're able to double jump by hitting the jump button twice, and attack enemies both up close with your melee weapon and at a distance with your ranged weapon. Now you get a limited supply of ammo, but melee attacks replenish this, so a lot of the game's combat involves you switching between the two. Upon killing enemies, they'll often drop gold, blue skill tokens and sometimes red health orbs, and they also have a chance to drop a random weapon. When it comes to the game's weapons, there are a total of 5 different melee weapons which include daggers, spears and the awesome gunchucks, and there are 4 different ranged weapons including pistols, shotguns, bows and burst rifles. Each weapon comes with a random set of bonuses which improve your character's abilities or attributes, and you can also obtain and equip armour, a ring and a necklace. Now equipment is given a coloured background based on its rarity, with rarer equipment having more bonuses. You're able to spend gold that you find to improve weapons at the blacksmith, which increases the bonuses, with rarer weapons allowing for more upgrades. Now the enemies that you face in the early game are relatively tame, and they also come in both melee and ranged variants. Each enemy tends to have a bit of a wind up animation before the attack, which gives you a chance to perform a slide to dodge them, and you'll be using this manoeuvre a hell of a lot, as 90% of your combat scenarios in the game follow the same basic principle. Engage in combat with an enemy, slide past their attack, hit them a little bit, slide past their attack again, rinse and repeat. Now there are occasions when you end up jumping between groups of enemies, but combat in the game is nowhere near as strategic or enjoyable as it could be, and this is in part due to the fact that your jumping manoeuvres are not available from the get-go, and instead are obtained as you progress through the game. Not only does this limit level design and your route through levels, it also simplifies and slows down combat, and I felt that one of the biggest missing features was some sort of air-based combat. Now in addition to weapons, you get access to a number of different active abilities which are accrued as you progress through the game. These include offensive abilities which cause damage to groups of enemies, defensive abilities including a shield which blocks attacks and a heal which regenerates your health, and buffs which increase your attack speed and damage for a short period of time. These active abilities can be upgraded multiple times by spending skill tokens, with each upgrade costing more than the last. Additional ability boosts can also be found hidden away within secret areas in levels. Now your skill tokens can be also used to unlock and upgrade different passive skills, which include buffs to your damage, health and crit rate, as well as skills which proc when you take or deal damage, such as poisonous clouds or defensive shields. In order to unlock more advanced passive skills, you first need to obtain catalysts, which then allow you to select between 2 skill trees, but if it turns out that you're not happy with any of the skills that you've selected, you can refund the skill token cost and redistribute them by spending gold. So levels within Foregone all follow the same format. You work your way through a level, fighting past a bunch of enemies, activating checkpoints as you go, which can also be used to teleport you back to the hub area. Now as well as general basic platforming, you'll often encounter locked doors which bar your way, and these can be opened in one of 2 ways, either by finding and operating a switch, or by defeating a bunch of enemies with keys above their heads. But this is about as intricate and in-depth as levels get in Foregone, bar a couple of levels which had some hazardous or spiky blocks to avoid, and one incredibly annoying section of a level where the air was poisoned, and you had no real option other than to run straight through it and completely ignore any enemies. So each level contains 3 areas for you to work through, and at the end of the 3rd area you'll often face a boss battle. Now boss battles in the game generally offer a little more challenge than standard enemies, but they're reasonably easy to beat, bar the first boss due to you having limited equipment, and the last boss just cause he's a bit of an asshole. As with all the visuals in the game, I thought the bosses looked fantastic and they were well animated. but many of the game's bosses require the same strike-dodge-strike strategy used against standard enemies to beat them, with the added variety of unique boss mechanics to dodge instead of just general enemy attacks. Now, if at any point you die either to a boss or standard enemy, in a Dark Souls-like mechanic you'll drop all of your carried gold and ability points and be sent back to the hub world. Here, if you choose, you can speak to this Grim Reaper looking fella and sacrifice half of what you've dropped to instantly recover the other half. You will die a lot whilst playing for reasons that will soon become apparent, but this whole process of teleporting back to the hub world only to teleport back into the level becomes incredibly tedious, as you have to sit through 2 loading screens. Upon returning to the level, enemies will have respawned, and you'll then have to fight through them all again to recover your lost gold and skill tokens. Now, before I get on to covering off my list of issues with Foregone, I want to first say that the game's visuals are pretty great. Each area of the game has clearly had a ton of work put into them, giving some impressive and unique environments, and whilst many will likely make comparisons between Foregone and Dead Cells, it's important to remember that they're distinctly different games, and I'd say that Foregone definitely has the upper hand when it comes to visual variety. These visuals, however, come at a high price, as the Nintendo Switch can't really deal with what the game is throwing at it. Things don't begin too bad, although I did notice a bit of stuttering not long after starting the game, but the further into the game you get, the more complex and demanding the visuals seem to become, though in some areas I really couldn't work out what was causing the game to perform so badly. The frame rate really starts to drag, dropping well below 30 frames per second throughout the majority of the game's levels, leading to many deaths. And this is the last thing that you want happening in a fast-paced action platformer where precision is key to surviving. Not only does it make the fights in the game a lot more difficult than they should be, it also means that platforming in the game and making certain jumps can be incredibly frustrating. Now, I've already quantified the game's arsenal of weapons, which if I'm honest I was a little disappointed with, but the same can also be said of the game's enemies. Whilst there appears to be a decent amount of variety to them, the further into the game you get, the more you realise you're just facing reskinned versions of previous enemies wielding slightly different melee or ranged weapons, and all of them require the exact same repetitive dodge then attack process that I previously mentioned. This repeated use of enemies also means that their attacks remain the same throughout the game, which in turn means that difficulty isn't really scaled in any meaningful way. And enemy damage and health is simply buffed to compensate for your increased health, defense and damage. I'll also add that I thought that there was not really much going on in terms of enemy AI, with the majority of enemies unable to leave the platform that they spawn on, allowing you to attack them without fear of reprisal. Finally, I want to comment on the game's storyline, which in itself isn't too bad, but the problem is the majority of it is told in text form through lore books and diaries, mainly found at random within levels and after boss battles. And whilst there are a few short voiced cutscenes, these are few and far between, so the story never really stands out as being a major part of the game, and you never really care about the main character and the cause that she's fighting for. In fact, it's not until the very end of the game that you actually feel any emotion for your character, but by that time the game's more or less over. After completing the game, you can then begin New Game Plus, where you retain all of your skills and abilities, enemies and bosses are more powerful and you can obtain better loot. But after struggling through the game first time round, I'm not sure why I'd want to subject myself to another 10 hours of repetitive gameplay and frame rate hell. So now let's get on to rating Foregone. Now, I rate games between 1 and 5 stars, with a shovelware stamp of approval reserved for the worst games on the eShop. This rating is based on my own personal opinion on the quality and quantity of gameplay a title has to offer, and whether I believe it offers value for money to potential buyers. For a rating, and in its current state, I'd give Foregone 2 out of 5 stars. The frame rate issues really make the game very hard to play and enjoy, and that's even before we get started on the relatively shallow combat mechanics and limited weapon options. If the devs were to patch the game and get it running with a solid frame rate, I'd possibly push my rating up to 3 stars but no higher, and until they fix it, I wouldn't recommend buying the Nintendo Switch version of the game. Foregone sure has some beautiful visuals, but unfortunately they're both the best and the worst aspect of the game. You can get Foregone from the UK Switch eShop for £26.99 or from the US eShop for $29.99. Alternatively, the game's also available on Xbox One, PlayStation 4 and Steam. And that about wraps up this review of Foregone. Hit that like button if it helped you out, and let me know your thoughts and opinions on both the game and this review in the comments section below. Don't forget to subscribe to keep up to date with the channel's latest Nintendo Switch reviews and content, and jump onto the Starseekers Discord server to join its welcoming and growing community. For now though, I just want to thank you all once again for watching, and until next time, stay safe and game on.